Tad, it's heavy shit. It's been claimed that this is the reason.
The labels were under a lot of pressure to clean up their act and start putting warning labels on records, you know, questionable material.
We had nothing to do with this poster. It was just the brainchild of somebody who was working for the promotional company that promoted the tour. But we loved it. We thought it was a great idea and beautifully executed.
That was a communication error between, from what I understand, between management and the label.
Perhaps a butterfly moved its wings in Patagonia, and that influenced somebody at Giant, and a decision was made and we were dropped. I don't know. Could be anything. The fact is that nobody ever explained it to us.
They cut off tour support and we're stuck in Europe. They pulled the carpet out from under that one.
We felt like a curse was kind of like following the band, like a dark cloud hovering over us all the time, and that we couldn't escape it. And no matter what we did, that it was cursed.
And we're just starting to get the feeling like, what the hell is going on, you know? It's like, you know, we're starting to feel like jinxed.
Yeah, he knows his shit, though, doesn't he? We'd been together for quite a while, and there was just some tension in the band. I can't really explain it except for by saying that.
Well, I think musically we're just kind of like, Kurt and I were wanting to head in a different direction, and I don't know if Gary really was suited to that. He probably was. I don't think that there was a strange division going on.
It wasn't like Gary did anything that warranted being kicked out. It wasn't like he quit in a fury.
And Gary was probably the most sane guy out of us at the time. There's a lot of not good drugs going on. And I was, personally, I can speak for myself, I was not the healthiest of mind and body and spirit at the time.
Kurt kind of lost, you know, touch with being grounded, and so did I. I was right there with him on that. Gary would have beers and stuff, but he wasn't into smoking pot and doing drugs and stuff. He was really, Gary is a good person.
It's a really important and strong role that Gary provided. And everyone knew that. Everyone in the other bands, in the music community knew that. Gary keeps those guys sane, and he's the guy who directs them and keeps them focused.
I tend to sort of blame myself that maybe if I'd worked harder, could have smoothed things over and gotten things together. And I really regret it. It's one of those things that you can't fix. You can't turn back the clock. I wish it hadn't have happened. I wish that somehow we could have kept Gary in the band, and that he was a part of that Infrared Riding Hood recording.
Well, Infrared Riding Hood was the first record that we went as a three-piece.
That record was where things kind of got... I'm surprised that some of us made it through that. People were getting whacked out of their minds.
Man.
What's up, man?
Busted.
Right.
The Infrared sessions were quite interesting because their manager, Johnny Z, actually flew out from New York and spent some time with us in the studio.
Josh wanted to add some industrial sounds to one of the songs. So in those days, you know, I also managed Ministry, Al Jorgensen, and they just liked some of the effects that Ministry used, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of sampling it, they wanted to get real sound. So we were banging on stuff and keeping a beat, and I think they gave me a pipe to play. Really good drummer, psychopath from hell, man. He was a real psycho, but he's a great guy.
See, because Tad was into that. He was like, I was like, what do you think if I get these pieces of metal and I smash them?
It wasn't just like we were like banging on shit and, oh, that's great, you know. It had a method to it, and there was a desired end effect that we were going for.
The way we wrote that record was a direct result of not wanting to be overly analytic about the music. It started off with the first song. The way we wrote that record, Kurt had that bass riff that went dan 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 dan, and I just started playing the drums, and that whole record was written like that. Somebody just started playing a riff, and we wrote, and we not once, we never went, okay, this goes 4 times. How many times are we going to do this? When are we going to change that? Nothing was said. Nobody does that. You know, nobody makes a record and doesn't talk about how many times you're going to do this part. We're going to put this change. I've got this riff. Nobody said anything. There was. Can you imagine what I'm saying? It's like that's how together we were at that point, and we just went in and did that record, and it really was that. And I thought that record was so great because we did that, and that meant how tight we were.
There's kind of a pop aesthetic behind this record. A lot of the songs are very catchy, kind of a la 8-Way Santa, but there's also some very heavy shit happening too.
You know, the stuff that Tad was doing near the end of their career was the best Tad stuff of all.
Take me home, 'cause I wanna go. Bring it back. Sometimes. Let yourself free. Don't feel inside that I couldn't hide, but I can't forget to smile. Separates me from the joy of my body. All this lying.
I was always amazed. I mean, how the fuck do you go and make a record and get that gacked out of your mind and actually have anything come out, and then you hear Infrared and it's a brilliant record?
Basically, the A&R rep loved him and thought Ted was the next big thing, and they hired Ted because they signed Ted because of it.
The A&R person got fired and all of her bands got dropped literally the week the record was going to the stores.
They were trying to find who to talk to about us, and they called up and they said, which band? You know, and that's kind of a bad sign at that point, you know. Well, we don't know who you should talk to about that, you know.
And when an A&R person gets terminated at a major label, all of their bands get axed regardless of quality. Nobody's even listening to the music at that point. It's strictly a matter of bureaucratic musical chairs shifting. And the bands are often the unwitting victims of this, and it has nothing to do with music. Chances are nobody even listened to the Tad record.
We found out in retrospect that a whole whopping $650 was spent on advertising for Infrared Riding Hood.
The label just writes off the money.